Thank you for that. I'm sorry to the rest of my panelists for having been on wait for the past 40 minutes. I know time is precious to a lot of people. So we'll quickly try and cover the main points that this section is expected to cover. As Aditya mentioned, the topic is bridging the gap, initiatives to statistics. And I thought this was a brilliant panel to bring to light some of the areas that you have worked on in your respective organizations and what you've consulted with a lot of other organizations to bring some of this to light. Just before coming into this program, I was reading the Mercer 2020 report, which talks about when women thrive. Apparently, it's just fresh off the stove. It's just been published today. And three things that they specifically talk about if you want to really drive inclusion in your organization. One, how do you really set the tone right at the top? How does it become an agenda right from the board level downwards? How do you clearly set clear goals which are visible and ensure that people understand the meaning of it? It doesn't get diluted as it percolates through the organization. And three, how do we get data driven insights to form meaningful decision making in what we do? So I thought that was a good understanding, and to flesh that out further, we probably have this team which Aditya introduced. So my first question, Rashmi, let me start with you. Organizations agree on imperatives of equity, diversity, inclusion. We've heard that for a long. In fact, this entire seminar from morning has been discussing those threads. But still, why is the progress so low? What are the measures, or what do you suggest that organizations can do to taking on a wider acceptance amongst the organization to drive this quicker, faster, better?
So Sunita, first of all, I don't think it's an agenda which you can drive faster. It's an agenda because this agenda requires a huge mindset change, and that mindset change comes through with time, and therefore there is no quick answer or a speedy way to get that done. Having said that, I totally agree with you that despite all the talk that you hear about it in the media, organizations splashing posters all across their, premises and doing Women's Day and all other kinds of diversity celebrations and programs and seminars, we don't see too much of a movement on that front still, as much as we would have liked. And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. One that sometimes the organizations get things done when there's a stick coming from the regulatory bodies or from law enforcement bodies, whether it's the government or whoever else. And we've seen that in the past. We've seen that when SEBI mandated that companies should have women directors on the board, we saw some bit of movement happening on that front. Of course, there was still another piece out there saying that most of the companies got their female relatives to come on the board to fulfill that quota. But yeah, movement did happen. At least I'm glad that at least those women who were sitting inside in their homes were given some visibility, and they were out in the boardrooms, even if it was just for a customary appearance for a board meeting. And of course, that has changed subsequently, now that you need to have independent women directors. So I think, one, we do need measures and policies coming from the regulators and government to insist that organizations take concrete steps in terms of whether it's in terms of making sure that women get paid equally, whether it is in terms of making sure that each kind of an organization has a certain number of women employees, whatever it is. It could be a mix of all of these, but I think that's the first thing that needs to get done. And then comes the organization. Why do organizations fail, or why are they not able to implement? To my mind, that is the serious issue. And that, to me, is also because of the fact that most employees don't see this as a serious agenda. They usually see it as something which gets talked about on a Women's Day, They see it as something which comes as a reminder to them in an email once in 3 months, once in 4 months. And therefore, there is not enough seriousness in managers to implement the policies that the organizations put out. Because if you actually go back and ask each and every large organization, they'll show you heaps and heaps of papers which will be the policies they've put out to make sure that this agenda gets driven. But when you actually see numbers, it isn't there. So to me, couple of things that need to get done, and I think one of them is that the leaders themselves, the senior leadership themselves, need to demonstrate that they're acting on it, which means that they should fill up senior positions. They should use those senior positions also as role models to make sure that the entire organization buys into this whole theme of gender diversity, and can therefore drive that agenda not just from not at the top level, but it kind of percolates down through the chain all the way down. So I think that's the first thing. The second is that sometimes when we put out policies, we kind of become very narrow-minded in terms of, or the HR managers, sorry to say that, but they kind of become a little bit narrow-minded in terms of straight jacketing the issues, or not the issues, but the solutions to an issue. I think you need to enable, you need to empower and give some flexibility to managers also to make sure that they can drive their agenda. Let me give you an example. So for example, you've got a manager or you've got a mandatory thing about being in office. It isn't applicable these days because it's all work from home. But let's say you've got this whole mandate about being present in office. Now, the manager may still be getting that job done from the employee, but he or she needs to give that employee flexibility to either work from home or work on a bit of a flexi timing. But there is a policy from the organization that this is what can be done and what cannot be done. So I think that empowerment at the managerial level is important, so as to give them that flexibility to be able to modify and make the work environment which is good for gender diverse talent. I think the couple of things that I think will be are important for this agenda to be driven. And the other thing I've seen, and I've worked for a large organization like Vedanta, and by the way, they do a great job of it. And I kind of very proudly tell people that if you go to a workshop or a plant in any of the remote locations of Vedanta, you will see enough and more women engineers and technicians working there, because they've created an environment for them in that township or in that plant location, which is healthy, which is safe. So you have to really kind of think deep into what is it that is required at each and every level of the organization, at each and every location of the organization, to make sure that the women feel safe. And therefore, I think some of those things are important for making sure that we do get the numbers.
Sure. Thanks, Rashmi, for that. Sabu, I'll move to you, and I did hear the statement from Rashmi on the pointer to HR, and both of us coming from that community. So help me understand. You've got various diversity initiatives in Allstate, and of course a lot of metrics. That you track basis that. Tell us about some of the challenges that cropped up when you were trying to implement these initiatives around gender inclusivity at the workplace. You're on mute, Sabu. You're on mute. We can't hear you.
Sorry. Thank you, Sunita, and good afternoon to all of you. First of all, thank you, the organizers, inviting me for this event. I can take your question, Sunita. I mean, the kind of challenges when we implement gender diversity or diversity in general, is where are we prioritizing it? Is it one of the activity or actions of HR department, or is it part of the DNA of the organization? So diversity should be part of the value system of the organization. And in Allstate, it is one of the core values of the organization in terms of diversity. I'm talking about diversity in general. Gender diversity is part of that, right? So we provide a lot of focus in terms of driving, diversity within the organization. When it's become core priority and part of the value system, appropriate policies will come out, right? And it's very important to have appropriate policy to facilitate and enable women employees to come to office and work. For example, we encountered a situation that many of our employees, women employees, were taking maternity break. And after that, it is difficult for them to come back. Now it's 6 months, earlier it was 3 months. And can we have a part-time policy for them? And can we have a policy that they can work from home most of their time, and then whenever they are available, they come to office for whatever may be required to be done in office, kind of things, right? So the priority is set at the right place. I'm sure that this program will be very, very successful. The second thing is that how you get the support from the leadership. And this is a business organization. End of the day, we are not here to do social work, right? It's a business-driven organization. So McKinsey says that where there is a diversity, 40% of productivity is improved, or you will get diverse thought leadership there, and more creativity and innovation comes in there. Can we start measuring that in terms of what is the outcome of diversity towards the benefits of the organization with the business? Once we do that, I'm sure that we will get a lot of buy-in from the business or leadership, because it is not just a number game, but it is what you call output or a productivity gain kind of things. The other challenge maybe is that, those are, not that relevant ones. The first two, the priority as well as the value creation, is very clearly established. The third thing I would think is, do we have enough budget, resources, and all those things are allocated for driving diversity initiatives? Because we may have to have different platforms, different policies, different tools, and all those things need to be implemented. So do we have that kind of budget available within the organization? Is it part of your budgeting program that you need to drive diversity initiatives in the organization? Yet another thing I can think about the challenge is that, how flexible you are. In terms of, you cannot have, one fit for all kind of policies. And you need to have flexibility in terms of implementing policies to support different diverse groups, especially the gender diversity kind of things. And that kind of flexibility has it come part of the culture of the organization. And once we have all these things, the culture is built, the education is given to the managers, and it has become the part of the DNA of the organization. I'm sure that it will go beyond a number game, but it's a productivity and a value creation kind of initiative.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Sabu. No, it's a good roundup of what you've experienced within the organization. Maybe I'll move to Akshay, because Akshay, you consult with so many different organizations. So would you be able to share insights of your experience about some of the best practices in these organizations that I'm sure will come in handy for our audience here today?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Sunita, and thank you for inviting me over. Thank you, Aditya, for the wonderful introduction that you gave. And Rashmi, by the way, we have worked a lot with Vedanta and Kane. So I myself visited a lot of plants in the remotest locations: Rageshwari, Rava, Bhagyam, Barmer, Mangala, plants in Gujarat and Andhra like Aishwarya. I've myself been there. And so we started the culture of inclusion there. And so conducted trainings myself there. And I can, yes, proudly say you've come a long way, and they were doing a great job there. So, and we are now starting a Vedanta-wide project very soon. So yeah, thank you for your question. Moving on. That's right. With the, with my experience with a lot of corporate organizations, between me and Dr. Neeru, who's the CEO of this organization, we've trained about 20,000 people, which is the highest in Asia. We work with organizations like Walmart, PepsiCo, Vodafone, American Express, Google, RBS, Reckitt Benckiser, Vedanta, ABB, etc. And I mean Tata Group, and a lot more. And for any organization to be able to change the culture in a way that there is equal representation by both genders at all levels, and that there is safe place for both men and women, and for that matter, for any form of diversity, to contribute to their ideas, right? So the place to begin is the leadership, and we have talked about this in the previous sessions as well, and so many people spoke about it. So in our experience, we have seen that the organizations where the leaders have the willingness and where the leaders invest their time into familiarizing themselves completely on themes of bias and inclusion, that is the organization where the real change actually happens. The second most critical factor is that initiatives have to happen at a pan organizational level, where critical mass is touched by sensitization initiatives. And by this, I mean both men and women at all levels. There are some organizations which think that imbalance can be corrected by just women. Well, that's a myth. So we do programs which are not gender sensitization, but gender intelligence, which is a totally different ballgame. Here we equip the employees with information and tools that can leverage the diversity of thought for not only better engagement, but powerful business results. We also do something which we call as journey. So these are very important. We have always been at the forefront of conducting summits yearly, and we conducted summits with the United Nations, with the Times of India, etc. When we come to the organizations, we've seen that just workshops are sporadic workshops just for a particular group of people here and there. They don't fetch results, right? Because people are very busy, especially in these COVID times. We have a lot to cover in very little time, and people are trying to deliver a lot in very little time. So whatever you learn in these workshops, it easily gets lost somewhere. So there is something that we call as journeys, and we're conducting these journeys with the Tata Group, with Unilever, with ABB, and we have seen phenomenal results rather than just workshops. With these are 3 to 4 month long journeys in which we conduct ultimate breakthrough for women leaders. We do inclusive leadership journeys. We do a combination of diagnostics and workshops, and we provide them with nudges. We provide them with individual coachings for a period of 3 to 4 months, and we see that these journeys are giving these organizations 10x times of results than what probably just individual workshops give. So these are certain things that really do work and are changing with time in the field of diversity. Yeah.
Thanks, Akshay. And there's a follow-on question to what you said, Akshay. So when you talk about trainings, what is your own belief? That do you feel that at the leadership levels, because I hear a lot of companies saying, okay, you don't have diversity right at the top, so let's have some training programs exclusively for women at the top. So since you've come with that background, what's your own position there?
So, like I said, if you conduct just women leadership journeys, it will not help them, and just workshops won't help. Just women workshops won't help at all. So you need journeys for senior leaders as a whole, and then trickle it down to the entire organization. And like I said, you need to cover a critical mass of people, and just empowering the woman won't help, because males are the major stakeholders in organizations, and we cannot ignore that, right? So till the time we do not train the males, and that's why I said we don't call it as gender inclusion workshops, we call it as gender intelligence workshops, where everybody gets to know each other and everybody gets to know how to leverage each other's strengths, rather than just one part of the organization trying to hit hard, and the other organization not concerned, at the part of the organization which is the male part not being concerned at all. So yeah, that's what I think is
Thanks,
important.
Akshay. I think that's a good insight. Um, you know, Rashmi, this question is for you. I was just thinking, in the past just 2 weeks, I think there have been enough and more seminars which have hit me saying, we're having a seminar around diversity and inclusion, come be a speaker for it, or, so on and so forth. So do you think there's a kind of diversity fatigue that has set in, because everyone wants to jump in? Probably this seems to be the making the right noises. So what's your take on that?
Um, See, it's a person's viewpoint, Sunita. You will, in fact, in any organization, also find people who are skeptics, who think that there is just too much of diversity that is happening, and yes, there are people who kind of get a little tired of this whole noise that happens around the diversity piece. It all depends upon how an organization drives this agenda through the organization. So Akshay kind of talked about a few things that organizations do. I'll give you an example. In Vedanta, for example, um, and people may like it, may not like it, but I think it's a great way of attracting women talent, is that we do a hiring program, or we did a hiring program, at least when I was there, where we just interviewed women candidates in the finance field. And we said, let's give them all a chance to come and present themselves to us. And if we find the right talent, we'll find a position for them in the company. So it was actually all driven from the top, from the senior management, saying we have to at all levels make sure that we have enough diversity, because, and it's not just because we want women around them, they are beautiful creatures, and therefore we want to have women around us in each and every location and each and every function, but it was the value that they saw that women brought to the table, and that's how they run that program. So it all depends upon how you run that initiative in your organization. If And also what I've seen is that sometimes, not sometimes, but I've mostly seen that if you drive this initiative more as a penalty, you penalize people for not driving this agenda, it doesn't work. It works only if you do more of an encouragement. You showcase the good work that people are doing. You talk about the talent that you've been able to either promote internally, or the talent that you've been able to bring from outside, and therefore the value that they've created for the organization. It works more on encouragement than on penalizing people. So I would say it's a mixed bag, and it all depends upon how their organization is driving this initiative within them. So yeah.
Great. Thanks, Rashmi. A follow-on question, Sabu, for you, because Rashmi did talk about, a particular role and how you got in only women to kind of interview for that role. So, do you believe, or in Allstate, what has really worked? The fact that you put a number stake on the ground and then rally behind it, or you just wait for things to happen organically, where people will realize the true need for it and will go after it themselves? So, because I know that there is a divided world on it, one half which believes that metrics and measurement is the only way that you can make the meter move, and there's another half which strongly believes that it is the right thing to do, and if it is the right thing to do, then people should automatically gravitate towards it. So what's your take at Allstate on this?
I think in Allstate, it is the metrics is a result of it. It's, the core thing is that the purpose of diversity itself. Diversity as inclusion is a core part of the business, and that's very much needed. And metrics we track at various levels. And we look at a top level, we look at various levels, various skill levels, all those kinds of things. In fact, when we started Allstate in India, the initial stages, we were almost 50-50 in terms of our gender ratio. And we could not maintain that. It's almost 40-60 now. Yes, we have metrics. We look at the level-wise or grade-wise or skill-wise, all kinds of gender ratio. We'll check. We will check the retention rate of women employees. We also look at internal growth of women employees compared to that. We look at the compensation levels of women employees, the parity check, and all those kinds of things. All those metrics are very important. But that is the result. What we are looking at is that, how we can bring in a kind of culture within the organization. And as Akshay as well as Rashmi was telling that, the kind of training what we provide, for everybody, not just for women employees, but for everybody. And we want every employee to be ambassador of, diversity in the organization. We do have training for all employees. We have specific training for recruitment team, how you can source women employees and get them, interview them, and all those kinds of things. We have a specific training program for managers, hiring managers, in terms of conducting interviews and all those kinds of things. So we do various trainings in terms of creating this awareness. Also try to educate them the value creation it can bring in. The other thing is that, what kind of training you give to the women employees, because once they come on board, it's important that they need to grow. and they need to meet their challenges of their personal life, their family life, and all those kinds of things. We have launched a program called Winspire. Winspire is basically for the women employees. That is aimed at assessing the skill levels of women employees and skill development, group coaching, counseling services, career growth, planning for them, all kinds of training program. It's a 3-month long training program for women employees. That will enable them to continue with the job, and also this kind of programs also will help these women employees to attract other women employees to the organization. Here there is a place which recognizes gender diversity and gives all the kind of opportunities and facilities. So to just answer your question, we track numbers, but that is the result. But what we look at practically is that the core value it is bringing in, and we work there. And as I told you, the beginning itself is one of the core values of the organization. So right from our chairman to everybody embrace that.
Sabu, you mentioned about, probably the numbers being almost a 40-60 today. Is that more at the overall level, or is that at every level in the organization you see that happening?
It is almost at overall level, but every level we have not achieved. That's where we are trying to, and that varies from level to level.
So what do you do? The reason I'm trying to get a little more is, like you said, this is the result. You measure it. You show people the mirror. So what really happens? Can you help the audience understand what really happens from the time you show the leaders the mirror to how do you actually get the correction done? So, for example, let's take and you being in the people function. So let's take that you've actually seen a pay parity disparity between two. So is that something that you are empowered to correct on your own without the manager's inputs coming in? Or maybe for a promotion, say for example, what you finally see is that there are more men getting promoted. So how really do you go about doing that correction after seeing the metrics the way it is?
Sunita, pay parity we look at the global level itself. That there is a team looking into that, the pay parity, and we will not allow any kind of pay parity. We are empowered to correct if there is a disparity in the payment for women employees. We will not allow that to happen. And the payment is for a particular role, not for a particular gender. And whoever is playing that particular role will get equal kind of remuneration, right? So that is definitely checked. And also, where are you showing this mirror and what actions taken? So we keep on presenting this. We present the DI initiatives. For us, the DI is all inclusive. That gender diversity is also part of that. In the leadership meetings, I'm talking about India, and if you look in the leadership meetings, we present that, and we look at which level, which area it is lagging behind, or if we need to catch up with in terms of hiring more women employees or women leaders. Then we'll take deliberate decisions, and we'll hold positions exclusively for women employees. And we will have specific drives run for attracting women employees for the organization. And we'll make sure that those positions are filled with women employees. And you asked a question about promotions and all those kinds of things. We won't differentiate. It's not fair to differentiate because you give special consideration because of the women employees, but we will not do any kind of we will remove all the biases there. When it comes a promotion, say for example a position which has got a night shift, or the employees working in different shifts and all those kinds of things, there can be biases coming in there. We will try to avoid all kinds of biases so that the both gender, women and male and female, get the same kind of opportunity within the organization. That's what we focus on.
Thanks, Sabu. So that gets me to the next question on bias that you spoke about. And Akshay, I do know that a lot of organizations today are focused on how do you eliminate that unconscious bias that is there in every one of us. It's almost like I want to hire people who look like me, talk like me, who I can have a drink with in the evening. The tendency is obviously to gravitate to people whom you quote unquote like, so that's a kind of bias that one grows with. So do you see a lot of organizations seeking such trainings, doing something about eliminating the unconscious bias in their organizations? You're on mute, Akshay. Akshay, you're on mute.
Thank you and sorry. So almost all of them. And if any organization is not particularly working on unconscious biases and is just working on probably gender sensitization or diversity sensitization, then the work will never be done or probably just partially done. Because the root of all, let's say, discrimination or exclusion, which is the opposite of inclusion, is unconscious bias. So you are biased in a certain way, whether consciously or unconsciously, because of which exclusion happens, right? So exclusion per se is not an entity in its own. It happens because of something, and that something is unconscious biases or sometimes even conscious biases. And it is imperative to work on it, and that's why we have a program which is called as inclusive intelligence. So inclusive intelligence is very different from gender intelligence. So gender intelligence works on gender sensitizations and leveraging the different strengths of both the genders, whether men and women, and other genders as well. But inclusive intelligence works on the phenomenon of unconscious biases. So we've partnered with somebody called as Howard Ross, if you've heard of him. He's the father of unconscious biases in the management world, and so we are his partners, and we do a lot of work with him. And we actually take these trainings at the leadership level, and then we trickle it down to the entire organization. That's how it works. Until you cover a critical mass, it won't work. So let me give you a brief framework of how it should be done, and probably a recommendation to other organizations as well. So for the top leadership, you do the inclusive intelligence journey. So the inclusive intelligence journey includes the unconscious bias bit, because the training is not complete without it. Then the manager rollout, and then the frontline sensitization for both gender and inclusive intelligence. And now intelligence again means unconscious biases as well. Then you do the cultural audits and assessments. You take a temperature dipstick, to be done in the beginning and then at regular intervals, through focus group discussions, online assessments, review of policies, stakeholder interviews, any process which does not involve any of this. And like you said, because we were talking about unconscious biases, including that, will get only partial results. And again, like I said in my previous response as well, no longer these sporadic workshops will work. I mean, you do one workshop and then you think that some magic will happen one day, and people will suddenly become torchbearers after attending a session of 3 hours. Won't happen, right? I mean, many organizations have tried it. There have been ample of research. As an academician also, I can tell you that it doesn't work, right? People attend the workshop, it's a wow for them for that day, probably for a week, and then it goes away. So and like we said, unconscious biases are unconscious in nature. The word itself says unconscious in nature. So for example, I mean, thinking and unconscious biases are very natural to people. It's not that people are bad, everybody has it. So let me give you an example. Forget about organization, let me just give you an example. If I tell you to think about Egypt, what comes to your mind? I mean, you might be thinking about pyramids, right? But is Egypt all about just pyramids? No, it's not. If I tell you to think about Hawaii, what comes to your mind? Beaches and people chilling around on the beach with knickers and short shirts on, with a coconut in their hand. But is it all about that? It also has a corporate world. It also has a social world. It also has its own roads and things like that. So unconscious bias is a very natural phenomenon of the brain, which is straight away jumping to conclusions to save time, right? So it's important to cater to these unconscious biases, so that we have an authentic inclusion workplace, rather than just window dressing that's happening in some of the organizations. Some of the signature programs could be like gender intelligence, inclusive leadership journeys, like I said, and then ultimate breakthrough, which is a women leadership journey. Combining the inclusive intelligence journey and just the women's journey probably would fetch you the best results.
Got it. Thanks, Akshay. That was quite in depth, and I'm sure that is useful for a lot of our audience here. Maybe I'll come to the last question before we summarize, since I think we're running short of time. So Rashmi, not too many women actually climb the corporate ladder and actually reach at the top, right? Even today, while a lot of organizations, including Wipro, we're proud to say that it's a 50-50 that we get from the campuses, but there is a leaky bucket as they move up the chain. Either it is loss of interest from their side, or there's something that happens from the organization that the antibodies become so strong that they get ejected out. So, in your view, as a senior woman who's risen to this position, what is the message that you would like to put out there that senior women leaders need to do to drive the agenda from your own experience?
A couple of things, Sunita. I think the first thing is that as senior women leader, we need to lead by example. And that's, by the way, a great onus. It's a great responsibility on our shoulders to make sure that we may have struggled through some of the biases as we've been talking about in the last 1 hour, and have managed to break some of those myths around women and promotions and being given larger roles. But it's a great responsibility that comes on our shoulders to make sure that we lead by example, to set an example saying it's possible. So first of all, to let others know that yes, it's possible and it's not just something which is very difficult to achieve. I think that's the first thing. The second, you will find that in all organizations, you will find that the senior women leaders are being invited and they have a say in setting up policies and in setting up a direction to how to drive. And I'm just talking about gender diversity, not about diversity in general, but just on gender diversity. They're being given a seat on the table and being asked to contribute in terms of what the policies should be. They're being asked and are part of panels and committees where you take decisions about employee promotions, and therefore you can, in a way, cut out some of the biases that come in when a committee or a senior management considers women for promotion, because that's exactly what happens, because there are biases. For example, you'll be sitting in a room full of people who are looking at different employees and considering their promotions, and one of the promotions is for a job which is out of town in a different location, and your first comment will be, oh, this woman will never go, she'll never take a transfer because she's got family here. And I'm like, ask her, give her the choice. She may turn it down for whatever reasons, but at least let her know that she was considered, that she's capable, and that she has the potential to take a larger role, though it's in a different location. And you tell us whether you're comfortable with a transfer or no. So I think that's the second thing, that we have a say now. We should use that voice and not just become mere spectators or listeners whenever these policy discussions are happening and these policies are being set out. And I think the third very important thing, and this comes from experience, Sunita, somehow when you kind of reach a certain level in an organization or in your corporate career as well, you kind of just take it for granted. You just don't think that you've worked hard enough to get to that position. And when people come and ask you to share stories, you shy away because this isn't something that is great. It's just happened along the way. I was just moving along, choosing some particular job assignments, and suddenly I'm here as the chief executive officer or as chief financial officer. We need to share our stories. We need to talk about how we've gotten it done. And in our time, Sunita, you would know, we didn't have these policies, but we did have managers who took that leap of faith on us, who gave us that opportunity and that chance to take on a higher role, give us that window, give us that opportunity. And we just need to talk a bit more about our stories and how did we manage it.
Good. So essentially, role modeling is important.
Role modeling, and also, Sunita, I think, as I said, having a say and speaking up when you're made part of certain committees, and not just let others decide how should this agenda be driven.
Sure. So there is a question Aditya just sent me. There's a question from the audience, and probably Akshay, I'll post that to you. The question is, how do we distinguish between conscious and unconscious bias in a corporate workplace?
Even though it's quite difficult to distinguish, nevertheless, both are biases and need to be addressed. So, unconscious biases are biases which stem from a person's belief system in which he knows what he's doing and in which he knows that he has certain preferences and he's particularly clear about it. For example, there is a person who overtly believes, and I'm giving a direct example, not to degrade or uplift a particular group. So, for example, there is a particular manager who is outwardly and openly follows the Hindutva philosophy, and he says, I totally am with the Hindus and I don't like other religions. So that's a conscious bias. A person who consciously believes in a particular section of the population and does not treat the other group fairly, and he knows about it. And then there is another section of managers who innocently lead into biases, display biases, which they don't even know about. So, for example, there is a manager who in the beginning of every meeting, he hands over the reading material to a woman colleague and tells her to distribute those sheet of papers to the entire team. It happens once, it's happened twice, it happens thrice, and then she says, "Why is it always me who is having to distribute? Why not other people?" And then, when the question was asked to the manager, he said, I didn't even realize. And probably that's coming from a sense of unconscious bias, where when he was small, when he was little, he saw his mother giving tea to everybody in the family, or he saw the significant neighbors, significant adult women in his family, giving food to everybody in the family or distributing. He saw significant women in his family being nurturers and distributors. And so unconsciously, he was engaging into that behavior, which he did not even know about. So there are certain behaviors, and you'll be able to distinguish from the body language and from the tone of the person, whether that person is doing it deliberately or whether it is being done because of something which is an influence in his mind, but he does not know about it. You'll be able to know about it. And of course, for that, it's easier said than done. You need tools to address those biases. It's not that easy that, you go to a person and you tell him that you're doing this wrong, and he will say, "Oh, thank you very much for telling me that." It doesn't happen that way. So you need to have those tools, and you need to be empowered with those tools so that you can handle those situations effectively. At the end of the day, conscious or unconscious, both are biases and they need to be addressed, and you need to have tools for them.
Great. So Sagar Radhi, I hope that answers your question. So I guess we're bang on time. So maybe just to summarize, I will probably ask the three of you, if you could just summarize in one sentence the most effective way in your mind of how do we bridge the gap. So what is that one mantra that people can take away from this session on how do they bridge the gap? Just one sentence. Sabu, you're on mute. So Sabu, yeah.
So the mantra is that include all employees in your effort to drive diversity within the organization.
Okay, so that bridges the gap. Thanks, Sabu. Rashmi, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I agree with Sabu on driving it by including all employees. And as I said earlier, that the senior leadership, the leadership team has to drive this agenda by walking the talk.
Okay, so senior leadership buy-in, walk the talk, role modeling. Akshay, you?
So I strongly suggest that no layer of the organization can be left aside or neglected at any point of time. So we cannot assume that just covering the leadership will do the work, or just covering the middle managers will do the work, or just covering the HR will do. So no layer of the organization can be left aside or neglected at any point. Several creative things should be done all the time, because this journey does not have an end. So you need to keep the enthusiasm high all the time.
Great. Thanks, Akshay. And thank you, panelists, for spending your valuable time. You can see the poster behind me. We're celebrating the International Disability Week at Wipro. So I just felt it's good that we're talking about gender here, but there are other pillars of diversity.
Absolutely.
That one is focused on persons with disability being clearly one amongst them. So thank you to all of you. Have a great weekend, and I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did in terms of moderating it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.